back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. Today we'll be taking a look at one of the most recent audio drama box set releases, which is of course the first of two box sets released to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Bernice Summerfield, starting off with the story so far, Volume 1, featuring 3 adventures spread throughout the different eras of Bernice Summerfield's life. Now, firstly, addressing the elephant in the room. Of course, if you haven't seen my previous review of The Woman Who Lived book, you'll of course know already. However, I may as well just say it in case you haven't seen that video. Brand new change in location. I have now moved to uni halls. I'm now studying law, and I'm a little bit away from home, so therefore I've needed to move into uni accommodation, and I need to film videos here in order to keep back up on track. See, it's not the end of Hosty Towers. Hopefully I'll be back at some point. I don't particularly know when I'll get to film there. I suppose it just so happens if I go home I'll be able to film something like that. I'll work it all out, I don't know, but yeah, that's why we have a change in location. I'm still getting used to it. It still feels weird. It's a little bit echoey. I'll try and fix that in the future. Hopefully once there's more stuff in here it'll feel a bit better and more homely. But yeah, I thought I would just get that out of the way in case you were wondering. First off, and as always, in the description below, I will leave the link to go and buy this release from the Big Finish website. It's currently out now. The physical CD is £20 and the download is only £15. I do believe it will be going up to the normal recommended retail price when it's available in Safe Forbidden Planet and Amazon at the end of October 2018. I do believe it will probably go up to something like £30 or £35, something like that. So naturally, if you are interested by what is said throughout this review, I definitely recommend buying it before it goes up in price to save a little bit of money. Naturally, if you order it from the Big Finish website, you do also get the download version completely free as well, meaning you can listen to it literally immediately straight after buying it, so that is very good. And also, if you are interested by what I say throughout this review, you can also check out all the story details on Big Finish website, the casting information, the technical details, and you can also listen to the trailer as well, and that goes for exactly the same on the other volume of this series as well. The 3 adventures in this set are in fact completely separate and are not linked in any way. The only way they are technically linked is the fact that Bernice Summerfield is in them. Other than that, they are spread throughout different series of Bernice Summerfield's adventures that we've seen so far. First episode is Ever After Happy, written by James Goss. Episode 2 is The Grel Invasion, written by Jacqueline Rayner. And episode 3, to finish off the first volume of stories, is Braxiatel in Love, written by Simon Gurrier. And the whole box set is in fact directed by Scott Hancock. The producer is James Goss, script editor James Goss, and executive producers as per usual are Nicholas Briggs and Jason Haig-Ellery. Really excited for this box set, partly because I don't really have too much knowledge when it comes to Bernice Summerfield. I've only listened to the most recent new series adventures, including the David Warner Unbound Doctor, of course somebody who does also make an appearance in the second series of adventures in this sort of story so far, 20th anniversary series that is going on. So yeah, I was incredibly new to this format and the different characters that are from pre-existing stories, which we'll get onto in a little bit. But that said, at the same time, this box set is really good to use as a jumping on point. So for people like me who haven't seen the previous Bernice Summerfield adventures, this is a really nice anthology set kind of different periods of Benny's life, and that probably goes for the other box set as well, as it is a pretty similar format. Going on to the casting information, we have Lisa Barman as Bernice Summerfield, or Bernice Surprise Summerfield, as she is officially called, or even Benny, if you want to go by a nickname. Once again, Lisa Barman has done a really good job with her character. She's thoroughly enjoyable to listen to. I do always like Bernice. Like, she is a character with such excellent wit. Also, she is incredibly intelligent, a really strong female, and all the time she is incredibly independent. It is very rare that you actually see her in a story with the actual Doctor. She goes on her own adventures, and I think that Lisa Barman does definitely bring something to the role, which makes her feel incredibly serious, but also at the same time you can certainly have a laugh with the character. She has some brilliant one-liners, and yeah, I don't think I've actually listened to a Bernice box set so far where I've not enjoyed her character. So yeah, once again, there is a reason why Bernice Summerfield is essentially the First Lady of Big Finish, and there is also a reason why the Bernice Summerfield adventures have hit the 20th anniversary. It's the longest running, I do believe, female sci-fi spin-off ever. So yeah, there is a reason for that, and it's because Lisa Barman is a great actress, and also the writing talents behind this series are also incredibly high. Moving on to the other portrayal of Bernice Summerfield in this set, because we do in fact have 2, which is quite a rarity. This is in fact an opening story. We have Emily Lang as the younger version of Bernice Summerfield, and that story is really interesting because you get to know Bernice from, in fact, before the whole spin-off started. You get to know a younger version of her character, and Emily Lang does a very good job of making the character feel a little bit different, a bit more younger, but also at the same time having a few characters character traits in there that are similar to Lisa Barman's portrayal as Bernice Summerfield. You definitely feel like they are the same character, and also, oddly, the relationship that they have with each other, or technically the relationship that that one person has with their future self. At the same time, they don't quite trust each other. And also, for the first story, it makes a really enticing first listen. Stephen Fowle also plays a character in this box set called Jason Kane, which is somebody that, once again, if you are a fan of Bernice Summerfield, you will know exactly who he is. All I know is he is essentially the ex-husband to Bernice Summerfield, and I have a little bit of conflict here and there. Their relationship isn't exactly stable, and this box set kind of continues on. I do have it written on my notes, episode 2, in fact, I do believe is set around series 4 or series 5. Don't quote me on that though, however. So yeah, it's rather nice to have a little bit of a jumping on area to kind of see what their relationship is like, and I think that Stephen Fowle does a very good job of portraying this rather mysterious male character who kind of just wants to get back with his previous wife, but also at the same time, he is a really good protagonist. You don't quite know what he's thinking. He's quite funny as well. He, once again, much like Benny, has some great one-liners. They are essentially quite similar, but also at the same time rather different in their approach to things. Miles Richardson as Irving Braxiatel, of course the Chancellor of Gallifrey, also Mad Collector, and many other things I could call him. I've only ever, in fact, listened to him in one box set so far, and that was Gallifrey Time War Volume 1, and I absolutely adored him in that series. I think his voice is really enticing, really different, also really engaging as well. This version of Irving Braxiatel, I do believe, is a slightly earlier version of his character, where he is in his own sort of collection called the Braxiatel Collection, which is essentially a uni. I will come on to that in a little bit, but his character is really fun, although I think I did like the Gallifrey version of him a little bit more, partly because he had a bit more to do. I think that the story that he was in, being episode 3, was a little bit more aimed around the other areas of the narrative as opposed to him, which I suppose is not a bad thing. I think that I didn't even realise, well, I did in the previous review and I was absolutely shocked by it, is he is essentially the Doctor's brother, which is something that is unconfirmed. Would be great if maybe the television show could pick that up at some point, maybe even the 13th meets Irving Braxiatel, her own brother. I guess that would be quite cool, but yeah, I think that maybe it'll be something that is in a blurred area of Doctor Who history, because I don't think any writer is ever going to probably have the guts to actually confirm it for real. That's really it for the major characters for this read, so we'll come on to a few other people in a little bit once we move on to the narrative, but generally the casting is really good. All the supporting people as well are really strong, and that makes for 3 stories that in fact have very different settings, but also at the same time have really good small characters behind them as well. Moving on to the narratives now, taking a look at the first story, Ever After Happy, written by James Goss. It is essentially a character piece for Benny, so considering that these 2 box sets, being the story so far, Volume 1 and Volume 2, I think that this is a perfect way to start the box set, because it is essentially a character piece for Bernice Summerfield, where her older self goes back in time and meets her younger self, and I think it's very Benny-centred, which is brilliant. I think that it's really nice to have a story that definitely shows the struggles of her previous life, and no doubt if you're somebody that is in fact a fan of the Bernice Summerfield adventures, you'll probably be quite excited to see Benny essentially before the adventures even started, whenever it was of Oh No It Isn't on Big Finish, quite a long time ago, literally over 20 years ago in fact. So yeah, it's nice to have sort of an earlier version of that character. The version of Benny is in fact hiding in a military camp on another planet, and there's going to be these people that are going to invade, and she's basically taking on the role as a teacher or a counsellor to the many people on this planet, kind of the younger generation that are essentially being trained to sort of send themselves to their own deaths by protecting everybody else on the planet. And it is rather unusual to start off with, and you soon find out that Benny essentially has the short straw, because the sort of more high authority figures on this planet as a part of the military camp have in fact decided to frame her as the person that is in contact with the enemy, when in fact it isn't. And yet it's quite interesting to see Benny go under a struggle, because it turns out that the students in this camp in fact turn against her and burn all of her personal possessions, including like a few kitchenware pieces such as cups and things and cutlery, which in fact originally belonged to her parents that did die many years ago. And I think that she's in fact quite touched by that, but also at the same time it makes her a much stronger character. Story, we do also have Robbie Stevens playing the principal of the academy, and I think the only flaw that I can say about with his character and the whole story in general is the fact that I feel we didn't really have too much of him. I didn't really get his motives, because I think it will be no surprise to say that there is a little bit of corruption going on in this academy, and a few things are happening behind the scenes, and yeah, I feel like we didn't really have the aims by that really fully explored. I think it would have been nice to maybe take a little bit of the attention off Benny and devote a few more scenes to the academy principal and kind of saying why he is doing what he is doing, why is he contacting the enemy, and why is essentially sending his own students to their deaths. Really, it is quite dark, and I think that it would have been nice to see that developed a little bit more, because I do feel like it was a part of the plot that was a little bit undiscovered. And other than that, I think the actual elements where you have younger Benny and older Benny actually make up for that, because both of them, as I say, interact together incredibly well. Younger Benny realises that older Benny is in fact who she says she is, and they are both the same person. That leads to some really nice scenes as well, kind of giving her a few warnings and tips about her future lives and what she needs to do to kind of move on from the current state that she is in. So yeah, it's very nice, and it kind of is almost a counselling session, but the counsellor is in fact the person from the past. It's rather odd and quite complex, but also a really good jumping on point if you're somebody that isn't aware of the previous Bernice Summerfield adventures. Episode 2 of the box set is the Grel Invasion of Earth, written by Jacqueline Rayner. Now, Jacqueline Rayner is in fact one of the oldest writers for Bernice Summerfield. I do believe that she in fact adapted one of the early adventures, if not a few of the early adventures, from the first 1 or 2 seasons of Bernice Summerfield audio dramas. So naturally, due to this being a 20th anniversary box set, it is really nice to see her returning. And also in this episode we do have the Grel, which for those of you once again that have listened to previous Bernice adventures, the Grel are in fact an enemy that have came up before in a singular release story, and they are quite a bundle of laughs, to be honest. It is a very comedic story, very different. I've never experienced an audio drama story quite like this one, or an alien race quite like this one, because they are very unique in their own way, and basically they are obsessed with facts and knowledge, and they go around saying good fact, bad fact if things are false. And yet it is rather funny, but also at the same time, and quite the twisted thing about this episode is, although the enemy is in fact quite comical and you can't help but laugh over them, at the same time the actual premise of the episode of them draining knowledge out of people and then essentially leaving these bodies as mindless husks, almost like zombies, is in fact quite sad. They don't know who their family are, they don't know who their relatives are, they don't know their backstory, they don't know where they've came from, but instead the actual race that has invaded has took all of their knowledge, and they're eventually going to move away onto another planet and do exactly the same thing. And of course by the very end of the episode, Benny in fact has a rather big confliction where she thinks that she's going to sacrifice her own memories, including her memories of Jason Kane, in order to save everybody else on the planet. And yeah, the fact that I haven't listened to any of the previous Jason Kane adventures actually shows that this story is once again quite a good jumping on point for those early stories. Once again, referring to my notes, episode 2 is from around series 4 to series 5, where they in fact needed to fill in a little bit of a gap or a plot hole where apparently Bernice and Jason got back together and then they were apart again in one of the earlier seasons, and this story basically goes in that gap to say what sort of happened and how they ended up getting back together and the relationship that they have. So yeah, it's nice to see the Big Finish are filling in a few gaps there. But Jason is naturally, once again, as I was saying earlier, really nicely portrayed by Stephen. I think that he is quite interesting, but also really good to listen to. I feel like Bernice took a little bit of a backseat in this story, and it was a little bit more about Jason, and he isn't necessarily a character that you trust. He's somebody that has alternate motives. The whole reason why they in fact get sent to the future is because Jason wants to prove something to Benny by giving her a delivery, and he disguises himself as a delivery man, and it turns out on the inside of the delivery there is the time rings, and then they both end up getting sent into the future. And yeah, Benny's a little bit annoyed by this, but then the Grels come back and she kind of goes into her own adventure mode as per usual. I think that it is quite obvious that Jacqueline Rayner definitely knows how to portray Bernice incredibly well, no doubt because she's actually wrote her on many times on different occasions, and I feel like her, especially with Jason Kane as well, naturally she'll know the relationship that they have. Then also bringing in the Grel in there as well, something of which that she has in fact written for beforehand as well. I feel like everything is kind of returning back to the older themes of Bernice Summerfield. And that said, speaking of sort of themes, the episode in fact has a different theme to the other stories in this box set, where we have a rather interesting theme tune that in fact is essentially a song where we have vocals in it, and it's probably my favourite intro for this whole box set, and I'm guessing it's something that is once again from, say, Bernice Summerfield, the single releases, series 4 and series 5 around there. But yeah, that is certainly my favourite intro for this whole box set, but also something that you don't really expect from a Doctor Who spin-off either. The design of the Grel is also really interesting, something rather different, because they are almost these squid creatures and they do sound quite squid-like, almost like they're mumbling their words and things like that, which is quite cool. And also the actual atmosphere of what they're in and sort of the surroundings is really nicely recreated throughout this story as well. I could actually imagine the different scenes in my head quite nicely. So the sound design for this series was in fact done by Fox Yes and Music, and the other music was in fact done by Lone Morris. So yeah, credit to both of those, because I actually think this is some of the best soundtracks that I've actually heard to in an audio drama for quite a long time. The third and final story for this box set is Braxiatel in Love, written by Simon Gurrier. Now, I made a little bit of a prediction or a guess, so it's not completely accurate, but I do believe that episode 3 is from around the time period of Series 8, where Bernice Summerfield is in fact working for the Braxiatel collection, which, for those of you that don't know, Braxiatel, or Irving Braxiatel, is basically this Time Lord who is possibly the Doctor's brother, allegedly, we don't know, and he has a TARDIS and he likes collecting things, and he set up this uni on this asteroid that wants to give people an education, but they want to be well renowned as one of the best places to gain education in the universe. And yeah, it's basically the equivalent to sort of an outer space version of Cambridge. And when Irving comes across a sort of survivor of a planetary war, it turns out that he kind of gets with them in a relationship, and there's this whole scenario throughout the story of, does Irving actually like this person, or does he just want them to add to the collection? And once again, it kind of plays with emotions, and this whole story, I in fact have to give credit in this episode for a brilliant portrayal by Gabrielle Glaster, who plays Veronica Bland. She's a character that you instantly sort of recognise in this episode, and you don't really trust her, or at least I didn't throughout this story. You kind of feel like she is incredibly fake. Everybody starts liking her except Bernice. Even the people in the different meetings throughout the uni start turning against Bernice, and she certainly uses emotions towards other people and kind of gets from them sort of what she wants. And yeah, it is a little bit of a manipulative story. I don't really like the character, but for that reason I do think at the same time Gabrielle does a very good job of in fact being that character, because I kind of feel like you're not meant to like her. It goes far to say that this story in the box set is probably the one where you may need a little bit more context in order to fully understand it, because of course you've got the setting of the University of the Braxiatel collection. So I feel like if you've seen or listened to a few of the audio dramas in that setting beforehand, you'll no doubt like this story a little bit more. But the fact that this episode you are kind of plummeted into the situation of this is the location that you are in for this adventure, and then you don't really learn nothing else about it. So therefore, throughout the whole entire story, I did kind of feel like I was missing knowledge or missing a little bit of understanding, or at least sort of I didn't understand what Bernice's job exactly was, because naturally that would have been developed a little bit further in the older releases from a few years back in like around Series 7 and Series 8 of the Bernice single releases. So yeah, there is a bit of an issue there for the new listeners that you may struggle to fully get into this story, but the whole episode, once again, is really wacky and unusual, because you have Bernice and everybody turning against her, and there is quite a lot of struggle throughout the story because of that, because you can quite obviously tell that Bernice is right, but of course Veronica is doing something to people's minds and making them kind of fall for her, so to speak. And at the same time, we have Benny going off to see other students in the university and kind of getting them to interview her as a part of sort of this newspaper that the Braxiatel collection sort of presents. In fact, one of the main students in this story, in fact portrayed by Taj Atwal, and they play a character called Reep Saluja, and she is an interviewee, and there's this moment in the early half of the story where she interviews Veronica, and there is a little bit of a conflict where it turns out that the interview has in fact delved into her history to find out that she's the last survivor of her own planet and things like that. And you kind of, from that moment onwards, if you're not already, you kind of don't trust her. You know that she has alternative motives. And by the final act of this story, I'm not going to reveal what happens, but basically I don't think anybody could actually predict what really happens, because it's just so wacky and wild and out there and different. And also, there wasn't really any clues in this story where you actually felt like it was obvious that that certain thing was going to happen. And certainly the way that Veronica is defeated is rather unique and different once again, and I'm not going to exactly explain why. I don't think that is spoilers of saying that Veronica is defeated, because of course she is. Bernice will always win, as you know, with every protagonist. But yeah, it is a fun story, as I say, but it may sort of lose a bit of its impact simply because of the fact that I'm a new listener to the older adventures, meaning that I am missing a little bit of knowledge in in there, but generally the relationship between Bernice and as well as Irving Braxiatel is rather interesting and different. It's kind of a professional relationship, but on the same time, you know that there is something a little bit more maybe going into their past. It does seem rather intriguing. I guess the Braxiatel collection almost has infinite possibilities when it comes to Doctor Who stories by collecting sort of random, spacious, sort of extraterrestrial props. What could possibly go wrong from that? But yeah, I think that generally for this story, I think Irving Braxiatel or Miles Richardson is probably the highlight, even though he's not in it much. I wanted more of his character, but that said, at the same time, there'll be lots of stories out there where he is given quite a lot of the attention, because he is a character that once he is in the room and once he is speaking, your attention is instantly driven to him. So yeah, a rather fun story, and a nice one to end off the first part to this story box set. Overall, for Bernice Summerfield, the story so far, Volume 1, I think that formats like this, when it comes to Big Finish box sets, are always really good for new listeners, because you essentially have 3 completely separate stories that go to 3 completely separate locations, and the only person that is in fact consistent all the way throughout is the main person that is in the box set. So in this case, it is of course Bernice Summerfield. And I feel like it's a good thing, because if you don't like one of the stories, then the other 2 you may like, because they're not following on, unlike stories such as, say, in Doom Coalition or Dark Eyes or the Time War box set, or the majority of Doctor Who box sets for that matter, normally have a few links that go in between them, and kind of you feel like every single story is intertwined in some way due to a plot arc or something like that. But with this box set, it is essentially completely separate, all self-contained, and all of them have something completely different to offer. So the first one, a really good character piece for Benny, both of which Emily and Lisa did an incredibly good job of really developing Bernice's character, and it's really good to in fact have 2 people interacting when they are essentially the same person. It's great for sci-fi as well, a perfect opportunity. Then the second story is just a little bit of fun, an alien invasion, sort of stereotypical alien invasion to some extent, but with a slightly darker twist in there as well, and the Grel are really entertaining, and you will laugh quite a lot throughout this story. I think if you have a similar sort of humour to sort of Jacqueline, who did write this story. And then the final of this box set, of course, the Braxiatel in Love episode, is a nice one also. It goes to a slightly different place, but also sort of explores the wacky and wild nature of Bernice Summerfield, and shows how adventures can seem to be quite average to start with, and kind of completely throw you out in unpredicted sort of waters of narrative when it comes to the very end of the story, where it pulls a wild card out and basically does something that you completely weren't expecting. And I think that once again, seeing all the relationships that Bernice has with many different people throughout the universe is one of the main reasons why this box set exists, and I presume it's also going to be something that will be continued in the Story So Far Volume 2 box set that will of course be reviewed also at some point in the future as well. So it was released alongside this one. Actually very looking forward to reviewing that one, because we have Michael Jason playing the Valeyard, which is brilliant, and then we also have the Unbound Doctor, of course portrayed by David Warner, which is somebody once again I naturally absolutely adore. I love his incarnation, and I think any more sort of stories showing their relationship in the Unbound universe is certainly something that I very much want to see more of in the future, and to do with that series was pretty much endless. Thank you for watching this review, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.